Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we pause to honor the American talents we have recently lost, along with other cherished figures whose presence left a mark on people far and wide. If this resonates with you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It truly helps us keep producing these tributes with the dignity and warmth they deserve. Thank you for joining us today. Let's honor their memories together. Donn Landee passed away at the age of 77. For many, that name won't ring a bell right away. He wasn't the kind of person who sought the spotlight or graced the front pages of magazines. But if you grew up turning the dial on rock radio during the late 70s or into the early 80s, his fingerprints were all over what you heard. The news of his passing arrived softly, without fanfare, which feels appropriate somehow. Here was a man who dedicated his entire career to crafting sound rather than courting fame. Working out of Sunset Sound Recorders alongside Ted Templeman, Landee was part of building recordings that have never stopped resonating. Those weren't just studio sessions. They carried texture, soul. Pull out any of those old Warner Brothers records, put them on, and you'll notice something. There's a warmth in the mix that feels human, breathing, not scrubbed clean but perfectly balanced. He collaborated with the artists who shaped a generation, and his greatest gift was knowing exactly when to get out of the way. That instinct is far less common than most people realize. Sound engineers of his caliber weren't merely capturing what happened in a room. They were guardians of a moment, holding it still before it could vanish. People who worked with him used to pass around a certain story. Late nights deep in Hollywood, tape still rolling, no one cutting corners. Landee would sit quietly, absorb everything, then make one precise adjustment that would shift the entire feel of a track. Nothing showy. Just right. He never made noise about his contributions. He didn't need to. The music said everything. And now when those tracks find you again, maybe drifting out of a car speaker or filling a quiet room at night, there's a new layer to it. You begin to understand how much of what moved you was built by people whose names you never knew. That's just the nature of it. The melodies outlast the makers, and quietly, those makers become woven into the songs themselves. William Finn left us at 73. It's the kind of loss that settles in slowly rather than hitting all at once. If theater was ever part of your world, whether that meant Broadway, a smaller off-Broadway house, or even a local stage production somewhere, chances are you've encountered his work, possibly without connecting it to his name right away. The announcement came without drama, a simple confirmation that let his body of work carry the weight of the moment. In the early 90s, when falsettos finally reached the audience it deserved, something genuinely changed in the room. This wasn't a musical built on cleverness or spectacle. It was raw in the best sense, emotionally tangled, truthful in ways that left people unprepared. It put families on stage that looked nothing like the traditional version and gave voice to conversations that most productions were still avoiding entirely. And it did all of this while walking away with Tony Awards. Finn had a particular gift for songs that didn't announce themselves as songs. They felt more like overheard confessions, fragmented thoughts, flashes of dark humor followed by something that lands square in the chest before you see it coming. In A New Brain you could sense fear and absurdity sharing the same breath. In the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee the laughs were real but there was always a current running beneath them. He wasn't reaching for polish. You could feel that in every measure. And perhaps that's exactly why his work burrowed so deep into the people who found it. There is something about a voice on stage singing words that refuse to fully resolve, that stays lodged in you well past the final curtain. Seasons pass. Those small, odd, perfectly imperfect lines resurface without warning. He is gone now. But those voices, stumbling and funny and achingly real, haven't stopped echoing. Dolores D. Freeman passed away at 66. She was never the name that led the headlines. But for anyone who spent real time with stage productions, late-night films, or the kinds of smaller projects that somehow stick with you longer than the big ones, her face will eventually come back to you. It might take a beat, then it clicks. Her passing was confirmed quietly, without much surrounding noise, and somehow that seems right. She was rooted in Louisiana, and that place has a way of shaping performers that you can't manufacture. There's a cadence to it, a weight carried low in the body. Freeman brought that quality onto every stage she stepped onto. She didn't try to fill the room by force. She understood the power of stillness, of holding back, of knowing when silence is the strongest choice available. That kind of discipline takes years to develop and most people never fully arrive at it. Through the 80s and well into the 90s she moved between theater and film, building the kind of career that doesn't generate massive headlines but earns something more lasting. Directors trusted her. Fellow actors respected her. When she was in a scene, something in the atmosphere changed. Things felt grounded, unhurried, just real enough to matter. A story used to circulate in certain theater circles about her. Late into a long rehearsal, energy depleted, everyone just trying to get through it, and Freeman still at work on a single line. Not performing it bigger or louder. Just getting it closer to the truth. That was her nature. No reinvention, no manufactured persona, only consistency carried forward day after day. Looking back now, performances like hers are the ones that endure. Not because they demanded to be remembered but because they quietly refused to be forgotten. Time keeps moving. The credits keep scrolling. But every so often you find yourself watching something again and there she is, calm and certain, still holding everything together from the inside. West London in the early 1950s was no place for softness. Certainly not for a boy like Roger Daltrey. He came into the world in 1944 in Shepherd's Bush, a neighborhood that expected you to figure things out fast or fall behind. His father spent long stretches away with the army. His mother kept the household from coming apart through sheer determination. There was nothing cushioned about growing up in that environment. Roger was restless in a way that classrooms had no framework for, energy that didn't sit still and didn't know where to go. By his teenage years that restlessness had gotten him thrown out of school. One confrontation, one decision, and suddenly the conventional road everyone assumed he'd travel had simply closed. But that wasn't the end of anything. It turned out to be the beginning. Something in him hardened rather than crumbled. He got his hands on a guitar, not out of any romantic notion about music, but because it was something solid, something that pushed back. He pulled together a group of local lads, Pete Townsend, John Entwistle, and eventually Keith Moon. They were not refined. They were blunt and loud and carried just enough danger to feel alive. Roger wasn't a technically gifted singer in those early days, not by any measure, but he had something harder to teach. A presence that commanded attention. Eyes that didn't flinch. A voice that sounded like it had a score to settle. By the early 60s they had settled on a name. The Who. Not poetic, but it held. There is something that happens when young men who feel excluded from the world decide to construct their own version of it. Sometimes the result is reckless. Sometimes it's extraordinary. Roger wasn't chasing celebrity in those early days. He simply needed to be heard. And once the world started listening, there was no going back. By 1965 the momentum had become something real and fast-moving. My generation broke through and suddenly all that coiled energy Roger had carried since boyhood had found its proper outlet. That staggered, defiant line about hoping to die before growing old wasn't just clever writing. It felt like a declaration. And Roger sang it as though he'd written it in his own blood. Live, he was impossible to ignore. Microphones sent spinning overhead in long arcs. His voice punching through whatever chaos Pete was generating behind him. Pete destroying guitars. Keith Moon existing in some category entirely his own, unpredictable and brilliant and somehow always exactly right. And John holding the bottom steady like a wall that never moved. Roger was what the eye found first though. He was the fixed point in the storm. None of it came without friction. The band argued constantly. There were evenings where things turned physical before they turned musical. Roger was briefly pushed out in 1965 following a clash with Keith. That chapter doesn't come up often, but it happened. When he returned he had changed. Sharper in focus, less combustible in some ways, more concentrated in others. Tommy arrived in 1969 and changed the conversation entirely. This was no longer just loud energy. It was architecture, narrative, something closer to opera. Roger inhabited that fully when he brought Tommy to the screen in 1975, and the weight of understanding was visible in his face. Fame, though, is not a smoothing agent. Beneath the performances lay grueling tours, mounting pressures, and a dawning recognition that nothing, not a voice, not a band, not a golden moment, remains intact forever. And yet for a stretch, a real stretch, Roger Daltrey was doing something more than performing. He was giving language to people who had none. What followed those peak years was not the graceful arc that fame is supposed to promise. In 1978 Keith Moon died at just 32. That is the kind of loss that doesn't process cleanly or quickly. It changes the shape of everything around it. For Roger it wasn't simply losing a bandmate. It was losing someone who had been present since the very start, through the noise and the brawling and the laughter that only that particular group of people could share. And the band continued. Because sometimes continuing is the only available response. Roger explored other avenues as well. Acting, recordings on his own. Some of it connected. Some of it didn't. That is the reality that public life tends to obscure. The early 80s brought a kind of stillness to The Who, not a formal ending at first, just a lengthening silence. Roger's voice evolved across those years, as it had to. Decades of singing with that kind of physical commitment leave permanent marks. He didn't try to conceal that or pretend he was still operating from the same instrument he had at 25. Then life tested him in a different register. In 2010 came a throat cancer diagnosis. For a man whose entire identity had been built inside his voice, that word carries a particular weight. It was caught early, treated successfully, and he came back. Changed but present. There is a variety of strength that only emerges on the other side of something like that. It has nothing to do with proving anything. It's about understanding what still matters and holding on to it. Roger has never spoken extensively about fear, but it's been audible in the quieter spaces of his performances for a long time. He's in his 80s now, which genuinely takes a moment to absorb when you say it plainly. Roger Daltrey. The man who once planted himself at the lip of a stage like an open dare to the universe. Still stepping out into the lights. Not pursuing anything in particular anymore, just arriving. The voice has shifted, naturally and inevitably. You cannot spend that many decades forcing sound through your body at that volume and intensity without the instrument changing around you. He's learned a different kind of economy now, understanding where to commit fully and where to allow the music to carry the moment forward on its own. It reads not as decline but as precision. He has spoken openly about his hearing as well. Decades pressed against amplifiers running at full power have taken their toll. There are moments now where quiet isn't just an absence of sound. It's a necessity, a form of care. You notice it in the small transitions between songs, the brief pauses, the quiet recalibrations. He doesn't mask it. He doesn't offer apologies for it either, because everything that caused it also gave him a life that most people only glimpse from the outside. The years away from performing have taken on their own meaning. Things have quieted down and become more deliberate. His involvement with the Teenage Cancer Trust has grown into something central to who he is now, not an obligation or a publicity note. Actual presence. Real conversations with young people carrying burdens that make a worn-out voice or tired ears feel trivial by comparison. It has altered something in him. When he speaks about that work the tempo changes, the words come more carefully, and you get the sense he has arrived at a kind of understanding that simply wasn't available to him when he was younger. The music still calls him back. Pete is still there too, both of them visibly older now, carrying the accumulated weight of everything in the way they carry themselves. But when that opening chord finally lands, something recognizable stirs. Not the wildfire of the early years. Not the reckless electricity that used to consume entire arenas. Something more rooted. The crowd responds to it instinctively. You can see it. The people in those seats who first heard these songs in their 20s, now accompanied by grandchildren or simply by the memories they carry quietly inside them. When Roger sings now, it isn't only about the music. It's about everything those songs have been attached to across entire lifetimes. He makes no attempt to reconstruct who he once was. That version of him has receded, though not entirely disappeared. It's more that it got absorbed into everything that came after. And that accumulation might be precisely what gives it staying power. This doesn't feel like a closing chapter. There's no valedictory quality to it, no sense of formal conclusion. Just another stage, another evening, another voice that still carries something genuine inside it. And when the lights finally drop and that last note stretches out longer than expected, everything in the room suggests he isn't finished yet.